Hello and welcome to a special episode of Simply Tax. Fast-moving developments of the new coronavirus and the challenges that come along with it are a top concern and topic of discussion for just about everyone I run into these days. And by run into, I of course mean virtually, since I'm working remotely from my home office for the weeks to come, like so many are right now. As I set up my new workspace in the bedroom, since where I typically work at home is designed for early mornings and late evenings when my 5-year-old roommates are already asleep, I got to thinking, I could really use some advice right now, and thought who better to talk to than friend of the podcast, Tony Nitti, who's been doing this work from home thing since, long before it was really a thing. I'm excited to share with you on the podcast today my conversation with Tony, where we cut through the sometimes stereotypical static that working from home was a glamorous world of cranking through tax returns on your couch, or jamming through partnership allocations in your jammies, to share what Tony's learned from his 15 years of experience at working from home, to offer some great tips and tricks for being effective, and to share Tony's advice for just about everyone as we embark on an uncharted journey of remote work. Enjoy.
The question of taxation touches every home in America.
Cutting through the static of the tax world, it's Simply Tax.
Kind of a crazy time, and that's really meant, I guess, in the public accounting world in particular, and as well as others, obviously, a lot of remote working from home. I know in your career that's been it's played a pretty big role for you, right? And so wanted to get you on the line here and get some best practices, but maybe we could just start there with, I guess, how remote working has played a role and what that's meant for you.
Sure. Well, first, Damien, thanks again for having me back. I always love being on here talking to you. Yeah, I've been working remotely, for 15 years, since 2006. And so, couple important caveats, I guess, before we get into kind of how it's impacted my career. And it's made a huge impact on my career, as we'll kind of talk about in a couple of minutes. But number one, right, obviously, when I started doing this in 2006, we didn't have some of the advantages we have now as far as, just the information, everything being available on the cloud and, Zoom and Skype and all the different resources we have, where we could still feel very, very connected with everybody we work with. And so it is definitely an easier time to work remotely than it was 15 years ago. But the environment we find ourselves in today absolutely poses some challenges that, I've never dealt with before. And what I mean by that is okay, right? I've been working remotely for 15 years, but the thing is now everybody's home. And when I mean everybody, it's not just me, right? It's my entire family. There's kids running around, and, for everyone that's now suddenly thrust into a situation where they have to take their office life and move it home, they're not just going to be home alone all day while everybody else is off doing their thing like I was when I started in 2006. No, you have to navigate your job with the fact that everybody else is going to be home with you. So that is certainly going to pose some challenges for people as we go forward. But a couple thoughts here.
All right.
The first message that I would kind of have for the entire industry, right, is just to plead that let's not screw this up. We've all clamored for the opportunity to have flexibility to work from home, right? And our industry has certainly been slow to kind of embrace that for a variety of reasons. But, a lot of people, not just the younger generation, looks and sees that, hey, the nature of the work that I do, with my tax prep software being, on the cloud, and my storage rooms for all our clients' information being accessible from anywhere and being able to zoom into any meeting I want. Why do I need to be in the office at all times? And now, in the most unfortunate of situations, we're being thrust into having to do that. But point is, if it goes well, right? If we all show that we're professionals that can handle this and thrive in this situation, then, a lot of this could become part of the new normal. In a weird way, this is all just one big, trial balloon for the industry to figure out, can we do this? Can we work remotely? Can people kind of be away from the supervised chargeable hour model and still do what needs to be done? And so, yeah, we don't want to get this wrong. If we do our work well here, it could add a layer of flexibility to our industry that, you and I are on a task force with the AICPA specifically to figure out how to appeal to younger accountants. And clearly something we talk about is their desire to have that flexibility, to not sit at a desk 15 hours, 16 hours a day during tax season. And this is something where we're all going to find out in one fell swoop whether or not this works for the industry. So let's get it right.
Like you said, interesting, almost experiment, but very important from that perspective. And again, the conversation's probably evolved again with some of the technology and that's evolved since 2006. But at the same time, there's probably still some of the same perceptions. And so I guess if you're going to say we're not going to screw it up, what's the thing we don't want to screw up the most? I mean, other than the obvious, making sure things are getting done, what are some of the things that even when you were kind of embarking on this, you were challenged with or presented as a no, this will never work for you sort of thing?
Yeah. So let's get a couple things clear. Number one, again, I said as an industry, let's not screw this up. The reality is, Damien, some people are going to absolutely thrive being able to work from home. Some some are going to fail spectacularly. Okay. And we'll talk about kind of why that is, but it's all comes down to human nature. So what we need to do, as I said, to kind of as an industry to not screw this up is number one, as you already alluded to, is it becomes all about productivity. And we'll talk about that and how that affected my career, but everything has to get done. Right. And for some people, again, that's having their career come down to simply productivity is all they've ever wanted, right? Like they've never wanted to be measured by how long they can sit at a desk and what their charge hour timesheet looks like. They want to just be measured by, hey, how good am I at what I do? What is it I'm producing every day? How much am I knocking out of the park? And they're going to have that opportunity now. But again, for other people who suddenly are given this flexibility and cannot or do not have the self-discipline to say, hey, I'm being measured on my productivity. I've got to resist the temptations that are everywhere and continue to get my work done. I mean, this they can flame out, like I said, pretty dramatically. But the thing I was going to mention is you got to be careful what you wish for. Like I said, everybody wants to be able to work remotely, but when you do it, to me at least, the kind of concession I made back in 2006 is like, look, okay, and it was a little different because again, I was working remotely, not everybody else was, but I still think even if everyone is, this trade-off has to happen, and that trade-off is, hey, I'm at home, right? I have flexibility. I can do this. I can do that. I can, work in a velour robe all day if I want to. The trade-off is I have to be hyper available. I have to overly communicate, right? Like if your phone rings and you're in the office and you're talking to somebody, you just say, I'm going to let that one go to voicemail, right? When you work remotely, communication becomes so critical that you can't do that anymore. Like your phone rings, you answer it, even if it's just to tell the person on the other line, can't talk right now, but I'll give you a call back as soon as I'm done doing what I'm doing. It's just so vital because this is an industry that has only known the ability to walk around a corner of an office to your cube and say, hey, how's that return coming? Or come by my desk in an hour and we'll go through the book tax adjustments on that return. And all of a sudden, when people can't see their coworkers, they just feel so disconnected and they just feel like the entire process is falling apart. And so the only way you can make up for that is, like I said, to really put an emphasis on communication. And so the way I always explained it is the day I started working remotely, my entire business model changed. And listen, this is not for everybody. Some people are not going to like to hear this. And I think a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today, quite frankly, is probably more of a do as I say, not as I do. I know what worked for me, and maybe it's not going to work for everyone. But one of the things I did is said, listen, if I'm going to have this concession, if I'm going to have this ability, to work from home where I think there's no pulling punches. We know, you and I have talked, we kind of know what my life is like out here in the mountains and why I live here. Like if I want to go for a mountain bike ride at lunch, I can do that. But the trade-off is I don't have a work day necessarily anymore. And I know you'll read articles online that say when you work remotely, it shouldn't be that way. You should have this set work day. But I just don't think that that's grounded in a whole ton of reality. I think if people are able to work from home, they're going to take advantage of that flexibility. They're going to spend some time with their kids during the day right now because it's a traumatic time for them. And so what you have to do is shift your business model in my mind to say, I'm kind of like 7-Eleven. I may not always be doing business, but I'm always open. Your day doesn't necessarily start or end, but you have to pick your battles and understand that, like, if somebody calls me at 7 in the morning, I'm answering the phone. If somebody calls me at 9 at night, I'm answering the phone, because the trade-off is, again, from 1 to 2, I may go for a walk with my kids, or, from 2 to 3, I might get a workout in that was never a possibility from 2 to 3 before. And so you can do those things, but for this to work as an industry, everyone's just going to kind of have to accept that the model that we've known of, hey, I'm going to punch in at 8 and punch out at 6, it's probably not going to work for everybody, because everyone now at home is thrust into different circumstances. And as I said, that's what makes this situation so unique. It's not that, a bunch of accountants are sitting at home, but all their spouses and their kids are off at school. Everybody is home. And so I almost think, as an industry, and I know people aren't going to like to hear it, we do have to take that approach of like, look, we all know that we have other priorities right now. We got to assuage the fears of our family. We've got other things to deal with, but the work has to get done. And to me, that's going to require kind of adopting a bit of a model where we're just open to doing that work any time of day. And like I said, understanding that we have to communicate, because your schedule, it doesn't necessarily match up with the people you're working for now. And so, right, like I said, you might want to spend that time with your kids in the morning, and the person you're working for might be doing it in the afternoon, and they're sitting there all morning waiting for something from you, and it's not coming because you're with your kids. But if you communicate and make clear kind of, hey, here's when I can get this to you today. Does that work? And if they say, no, I need it, this morning, then you change your schedule. So flexibility and communication, it's the only way we're going to survive all of this.
It's very individualized, it sounds like, obviously, right? So you kind of have to take some of the pieces that work for you and or might not work for you, and then I guess also factor in what it's like for other people and how that's going to work for them, because now everybody's in this giant, work from home, or a lot of people are experience. So the communication piece is huge. But any tips or advice from your experience on maybe communicating with people that have different communication styles than you?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said before, and I really do mean this. It was a conscious decision I made in 2006 when I started working remotely, where if my phone rings, right, I'm going to answer it, even if I'm busy, if I'm doing something personal, if I'm working on something else, I'm going to answer it and just have the brief, even if it's the briefest of conversations, to let them know what I'm doing, where I am. Like, that whole responsiveness has to be heightened to such a degree, because it's our only chance, right, to understand where we are in terms of getting a project done. And this is all going to go disastrously for the industry if people say, hey, I'm working from home, I'm busy, on this project from 10 to 1, and I'm just going to shut myself off to the outside world from 10 to 1. And there's a real temptation to do that. I mean, that's part of the appeal, right, of working from home, is that no one's going to come knock on my door of my office and distract me. And so from 10 to 1, I can focus on something. But you have an entire, you have a firm and coworkers and clients. And from 10 to 1, if someone needs to reach out to you just so they can understand what their day is going to look like, or how their expectations might be met for the project you're working on, you just can never turn down a phone call. You can never not respond to an email. And I know that's tough. That's frustrating, but that's part of the trade-off. This is all a trade-off. It has to be.
And going through those trade-offs, because I feel like there's probably a little bit of trial and error to figure that out. Do you have any other specific situations you dealt with, them either positive or negative, found what worked or didn't, that you could maybe share to, I guess, give a little light as to how you figured this out for yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And again, there's some elements of do as I say, not as I do here. But so when I started this in '06, and I may have told you some of this story, it is 100% true. I was a year into my career at Witham, Smith and Brown. I had obviously spent 6 years at the Big Four, but I was, at best, and I have the evaluations to prove this, I was a C plus employee. And I was a C plus employee largely because my work product was very good, and I was certainly interested in the law, but I was perceived as kind of not really being a team player because, I'm someone, I think we've established this, I live in the mountains for a reason. Like I'm very passionate about a lot of different things, and being outside and being in the mountains is certainly one of them. And even when I lived in New Jersey working for Witham, it may not have been the mountains, but I just love to do a lot of different things. I would come in late a couple mornings a week because I'd be at master swimming training for a triathlon. And then I'd, go for a long run during lunch or something like that. And in a public accounting traditional setting, particularly 15 years ago, not as much now, there was a, perception that, hey, if you're not in the foxhole with us every day, all day, and most nights, then you're not just really kind of part of the team. And my evaluations, reflected that that's how I was being viewed. And then the irony is I moved clear across the country to, Aspen, Colorado, where you would think if I truly wasn't kind of a team player, if I wasn't invested in my career, having all of those opportunities around me would have just spelled disaster. But instead, that is when my career took off. And in fact, I will never forget this. The next year, somebody who had given me a rough evaluation the year before gave me an eval that said, what a difference 2,000 miles makes. How did I get from point A to point B? Like, why did they suddenly think I was, better? And the thing is, obviously out here, I was still doing all of the same things. I was still, I was here to mountain bike. I was here to ski. And so why all of a sudden had the perception changed is because what I realized is, like I said, there's a trade-off that's going to happen here. Number one, I went into it with the mindset that everyone is going to expect this to go horribly, right? Everyone is going to expect me to be a disaster. And so I have to overcome that. Now, it's a little different now because we're all in the same boat. But at the time, I was just thinking, everyone's going to expect that I'm not going to answer my phone, that I'm not going to immediately respond to an email, that I'm not going to turn around this project as quickly as I would have in the office. And so, if I want to have this opportunity, if I want to have this flexibility that's being afforded to me, I got to make sure, right, that I don't meet those expectations of failure. I got to make sure that I knock everything out of the park. And so it certainly lit a fire under me. And I didn't want to screw it up, right? I wanted to have this in my life. And so I did approach it with that mindset of, hey, I got to do the opposite of what I think everyone is expecting I'm doing out here. And that doesn't mean, you don't take advantage of the flexibility. Clearly you do, but it means that, yeah, work is a priority. Being available is a priority. And most importantly, productivity is the priority. And that's where a lot of people in our industry, remember I said to you before, some are going to thrive and some are going to fail spectacularly. It all depends on kind of the personality and the way you choose to be viewed. But if you're somebody who in your career, and I know there's a lot of them out there who have said, okay, here's my frustration with public accounting, right? I could be sitting at my desk all day and I feel like I'm good at what I do. I feel like things come to me quickly. And, this is an extreme example, but it happens, like let's just say I'm at my desk for 15 hours. And for 15 hours, in those 15 hours, I get what amounts to what the person next to me would take 25 hours to get done, right? Well, if I'm there for 15 hours and the person next to me is there for, 25 hours straight, and we get the same amount of work done in our industry, sometimes it's the person that was there 25 hours that is looked at as kind of the more committed person just because they were physically at their desk longer. I mean, I know it's a rough commentary on our industry, but I'm not telling people something they don't know. I mean, it's a big part of how it works because we work in a chargeable hour model. And for that person who may have been frustrated in that scenario, right, that all goes away now. You work from home and no one knows how long you're sitting at your desk. All they know is what value are you providing, right? How productive are you? Are things getting done and are they getting done right? And so there is, again, a whole population of people that are going to feel, freed from the conventional model. And of course, chargeable hours are still important, but let's be honest, there's no way to police that anymore when everyone's working remotely. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to get your hours in. But the thing is, the people around you, they're not going to measure you anymore by what your charge report says or when they walk through the office at 9:00 at night, who's there and who's not to determine whether you're a team player. They're just going to say, hey, these people, these 5 people are knocking everything out of the park. They're available when I need them, and everything is done and done right. And the people who are going to struggle may have been some of those people who, again, not that there's anything wrong with this, but had built their career more on, hey, I am a workhorse. I am going to sit here, 18 hours a day and show everybody how committed I am. But if it turned out in that 18 hours you weren't getting a ton of value, that stuff's really going to come to the forefront when you're stuck working remotely. And so it becomes a completely different model where everything is going to be measured on just what it is you produce and how good it is and how timely it is. And no one's going to care in what fashion or form, you produce that work product, right? They're just going to ask, do I have it on time and is it right? And that's a big departure from what we're used to in our industry. There's no more kind of walking through the office and measuring people based on who's willing to sit there the longest. It's all going to come down to, who's doing their work and doing their work well and making everyone else's lives easier and just kind of moving the product along. And so for a lot of people, it's just this huge opportunity to really kind of strip out maybe some of the parts they didn't care for about public accounting and really just show that, hey, I'm good at what I do. I produce a lot of value. I certainly work hard. And that is kind of what I ultimately want to be measured on. And again, I am living proof that can work in your favor because my career was going one direction and it wasn't a particularly great direction. And then when I started to work remotely, nobody knew if I was going for a swim at 7 a.m. or going for a run at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They just knew what memos they were getting from me and what opinion letters I was cranking out and what returns I was reviewing. And that's what they valued and what they cared about. So you got to deliver. I mean, you really do. If it cuts both ways, if all we're going to be able to be measured on now is our productivity, well, that's why I said some people are going to fail spectacularly because it takes self-discipline to do this. It takes self-discipline to say, people are counting on me, even though I'm home and there's a TV right around the corner and my kids want to put together Legos and my dog wants to go play fetch. Like, those temptations are huge. But again, if we don't want to screw this up, if we want to have this opportunity afforded to us in the future when it's not done under such a tragic circumstance, then you've got to have that self-discipline to say, everyone's measuring me on my productivity. I can't let them down.
And maybe you were in a little bit of a different spot here, obviously, since you kind of had some years under the belt when you were embarking on this. But it was still sort of, we'll call it like the renaissance of your career, right? That, you kind of turned the corner, by all the, I guess, the feedback perspectives. But what if you're, kind of early on and, you don't know all of what you need to know yet still, and I would imagine, again, you went through this as you continue to progress in your career. How do you make sure that you're getting it done right if you don't know how to do it and you're working remotely?
So you make such a wonderful point there because, I take for granted the fact that when I got to work remotely, right, I was 7 and 8 years into my career. And so, what I wasn't doing a lot of in my career when I was in the office is sitting at somebody's desk with them and having them teach me the finer points of the law, right? I mean, I certainly didn't know everything I needed to know at that point, but I was a senior manager. And so if anything, what I lost out on, and I definitely felt this, I lost out on the ability to be on the other end of that, to be at the one at the desk teaching something to somebody. And the only thing I could say is, for younger people, this poses a challenge for career development because, as much as sometimes younger people say they don't want to be in the office, the reality is you learn so much, right? By being able to sit down, with a coworker and say, okay, here's where you went wrong with this, or you've never seen this before. Let me walk you through it. And we have to understand that at least for the foreseeable future, right, those types of face-to-face meetings aren't going to happen. And so that could potentially stall somebody's learning curve, but it really doesn't have to. And I'm really happy that you asked this question because, I have 2 people at Reuben Brown that I think if they could chime in right now, they'd say, okay, right, my learning curve, even working remotely, does not have to, be interrupted at all because we do have things now that I didn't have in 2006. And what I mean is I was working on a return this weekend with 2 people at my firm that had a 338H10 election. And, they'd never seen one of those. And they took the first shot at the return. And there was a bunch of things I wanted to teach them. And what do? We scheduled a Zoom meeting for Saturday morning. and I had the camera going, and I, had my screen shared, and we spent an hour and a half going through, the return line by line and jumping over to the code and jumping over to the purchase agreement. And in some ways, I think it was actually more efficient than it would have been in an office. I know that sounds crazy, but just because I had everything up on my screen and I could just move from one to the other, you don't have to, try to fight through a pile that's on your desk to find that page of the purchase agreement. But I got done that Zoom call and I really did. I walked off there thinking, okay, this could work for everybody. But the key is, it goes back to what we said. Those meetings can't stop. And there may be a temptation for some people for them to stop, for them to just say, well, all right, I got this return, that somebody prepared. There's some mistakes in it, but I'm sitting here at home and I'll just knock it out myself and make the changes. But that's not fair to the person who prepared them. And there's no reason they can't benefit from your experience, even though, we're all now doing this from our living rooms, because, Zoom, Skype, whatever it is that you prefer, they really are effective. I really enjoyed what we did on Saturday morning. And I do a lot of Zoom meetings just because of, again, the fact that this isn't new to me. But that is something I thought about is, boy, everybody goes remote. And yeah, the partners and senior managers and even the managers are saying, hey, this is great. I got this freedom I've worked for my whole career. But you're young, you're working your way up in your career. You could absolutely feel rudderless pretty quick, but it doesn't have to be that way. We all should be able to communicate to the same degree that we did before. And again, it can almost be more effective from a time management standpoint because you put a Zoom meeting on somebody's calendar and, it's not like it is in the office where, okay, we're going to sit down in 20 minutes, but then somebody else comes into your office and then all of a sudden it's, Janice and HR, it's her birthday and we got to all go to the kitchen. It's just, everything is streamlined. You can get everything on the schedule. And there really is no reason that anything has to break down in the process, given what we have now as far as technology.
And I'm laughing too because I feel like I always feel terrible for doing this when I'll say, I'm working with somebody and yeah, I've come by my desk at, like you said, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Then I end up kind of like leaving them hanging. I feel like because I end up on a call or, Janice,
Yeah,
we can't
exactly.
miss that. So it's interesting, but kind of back on that self-discipline topic. And you mentioned the kids with the Legos and I've got the kids with the Legos in the other room too, even now, doing this remotely here. What have you found from that? And, how do you kind of make those, it is all about trade-offs and how do you know that you're making the right trade-offs at the right time, particularly given if you're going to kind of be like 7-Eleven and know that you might have a call tonight at 9 o'clock you weren't expecting. So yeah, how do you kind of manage those things when you don't exactly know how it's going to play out?
Well, it depends, Damien. It depends if you want to believe right now, there's no shortage of articles, right, floating around the internet addressing exactly what we're addressing on this podcast, right? How to work from home. You can believe those. And I think that there's certainly may work for a lot of people. I can tell you my personal experience, and my personal experience is very different. And what I mean by that is those articles will tell you, hey, even though you're not in the office, set yourself up a work day, right? You're going to work from this time to this time. You're going to take breaks at this time. And, you still want to feel like you're in the office. Your brain needs that reset. So you need to kind of check out at a certain time and check in at a certain time and have a lunch. And listen, I get it, right? In an article form, that sounds awesome. The thing is, even before what's currently happening, that wasn't a model that necessarily worked for me because, I was working remotely. And part of the reason I did it is because of the things that I love to do that make me extremely happy. And those things tend to happen during daylight hours. And so, like I said, if I'm going for a mountain bike ride at lunch, I got to pay the price for that. I have to be available at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, or I have to do some work after the kids go to bed. And to me, that was a trade-off I was willing to make. Now, with where we are now and why we're being forced into this situation, I would tell you the reality that you're going to have a schedule every day from 8 till 7 with an hour lunch and 2 20-minute breaks. Look, maybe you can. If you can, you are a far better, more disciplined, and more, live in a more stable environment than I do, right? The reality for a lot of us is that we are in uncharted territory and we have kids that are scared and we have spouses that are home and no one has been through something like this before. And so to me, I've always said this, but work is extremely important, but it ain't the most important thing. And if you've got kids, I mean, right before I came on to join you with this podcast, I had something I wanted to get done before the podcast, but my kids, this is a new world for them today. They're kind of really making sense of the fact that why aren't we in school? They're 10 and 7. What is this going to look like? When are we going back to school? Why can't I see my friends? My daughter came up to me and said, can you make pancakes? It's like, you know what? I'm going to make pancakes. If those pancakes make my kid happier, I'm going to make pancakes. But that just means that 15, 20 minutes of work that I wanted to do before the podcast is going to have to get prioritized as soon as we're off the podcast. And so, the reality is, like I said, I would love to tell you all, set yourself a schedule and stick to it. And your brain, after X time at night needs to not think about work. We're accountants. It's tax season. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. There are a lot of things conspiring against us right now, right? Like I said, if you can come up with a day-to-day schedule that you can adhere to like that, then you're, again, a far more disciplined person than I am. To me, the big thing is really approaching it from that 7-Eleven perspective, which is that, okay, if I'm going to make my kid those pancakes this morning, and if I can't get back to that work that I wanted to get done this morning, and again, no one was waiting on that work, and that's a difference. But if I can't get back to that until the kids go to bed, well, when they go to bed, then it's going to have to get done then. And it's kind of been a way I've approached things for 15 years. And as I said, it may not work for everyone, but everything in life is a trade-off. It just is. And prior to this, if I wanted to live in Aspen to be able to go to ski, okay, that meant I had to answer every phone call. I had to respond to every email, and I had to get my work done every day, even if it required doing it later at night than I might like. Well, now, if we want to be there for our kids, which we certainly should, we want to be there for our spouses when they need help, even though it's tax season, we certainly should. It just means that we have to kind of adopt that I'm always open for business approach, because I just don't know that in the current environment, thinking that you're going to set this schedule and stick to it is realistic, given just kind of the state of affairs we find ourselves in.
I really appreciate you saying that too, because I feel like as accountants, we have this temptation to turn everything into a checklist or a to-do list or something, right? And so there's probably the propensity of those that read those kind of articles and just think, well, I'm failing because I'm not able to do this, especially, again, given the circumstances. I mean, there's the human aspect of this, and you just got to embrace that, right? I mean, it's a fact. There's fear, there's anxiety, there's panic going on. We have to recognize it and, like I said, embrace it. But I think you could find yourself feeling like you're really messing this up by beating yourself up for not being able to hold yourself to a schedule that perhaps, again, like you said, knock yourself out if that's you and you're able to do that effectively. But at the same time, if that's not you, that's okay. You just got to find another way that does work for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And what you have to remind yourself constantly is everybody in this industry is about to learn something that I learned 15 years ago. But you do not realize how much wasted motion there is in a typical day in the office. It's remarkable, Damien. I mean, it really is. When I say wasted motion, I just mean that when you're in an office environment, we all know. I mean, I'm not breaking any news here, but somebody pops by your office to talk about, Monday night football game, and it turns into 45 minutes, right? Or like I said, it's Janice's birthday, and so you're going into the kitchen and having a birthday. All of that stuff is stripped out now. All of it. Like, there's no commuting, right? There's no staff meetings necessarily. It's just all it comes down to in a given day is, are you there for your family? And are you productive at work? And are you taking care of yourself too, if there's something that you love to do or need to do? But you're going to have a lot more time than you used to. And I know that might seem counterintuitive when you say, well, I'm home and my kids are here and things like that. But trust me, in a typical day in an office, right, if you're there for 12 hours, sometimes you have to ask yourself, how much work am I actually getting done? And you absolutely will find when you work from home that the amount of work that you can produce in a given day is exponentially higher than it was in an office environment. And going back to what I said about that evaluation, when someone said what a difference 2,000 miles makes, what caused them to say that, right? They couldn't tell whether I was a more likable person because they didn't see me. They couldn't tell if I sat at my desk, longer during the day because they couldn't see me. All they could measure it on is what was I delivering? Was I responsive? Was I good at my job? And the reason I was more responsive and better at my job is just because, again, my days, they're still 24 hours in theory, but my days got a lot longer, right? There's just a lot more time to get everything done because maybe people recognize it, maybe they don't. But in a typical day in the office, things can go off the rails so quickly. And so you're going to have the time. And the notion that, again, if you don't compartmentalize and say, in these hours, I'm doing this, and then I'll give myself 15 minutes, if you don't do that you're failing. I just don't think, as you said, that's accounting for the human element and the unique situation that we find ourselves in, right? You can't beat yourself up. Like I said, I've got 2 scared kids at home. Everybody has scared people at home. And they need attention. They need to be a priority as well. And so you're going to have to be a little forgiving on yourself, but you do have to hold yourself to the standard. And as I said, maybe it's because I've always believed that fear is the single greatest motivator there is. But if you constantly remind yourself that the industry at large, you don't even have to have a specific person. Just say the industry at large is expecting me to fail and not be available and not be responsive and not get my work done because I'm being given this flexibility. And so I don't want to see that to fruition. Then, you'll go to bed every night knowing that you produced what you needed to produce. You delivered the value. You were responsive. This can all work out very well.
I like that. It's like we're all in this together. We gotta show up for each other to make this a successful run of being remote. Again, for those that do want this opportunity, we don't screw it up for them, right? So excellent points. And I love the practical. That was really what got me going down this road, thinking, you were doing this long before it was a thing, before it was, and again, you had also, along with that, challenges that we don't even have in terms of the technology piece, right? So the practical how-to is I think the piece that I feel like I am always looking for when it comes to this stuff that no article can quite convey, that at least that I've found. I don't mean that critically of them. I just feel like it's such a nuanced thing. So yeah, really, really great perspective on all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, the articles, they obviously mean well and they obviously work well for a lot of people. And some people are going to need to have that degree of self-discipline where a schedule is laid out, and that is fine. If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. Some of the stuff I chuckle at a little bit. I mean, David, I read the articles and they say hey, treat it like a work day. Get up in the morning, get in the shower, get dressed in kind of professional clothes and approach the day like a work day. And I'm like, that was most likely written by somebody who's never actually worked from home, because trust me, you worked from home and after 3 weeks you haven't basically regressed into a caveman, then you're probably doing it wrong, because that's part of the flexibilities. You're like, wait a minute, I don't need to be clean shaven and ready to go. I mean, over time the human element just takes over and you're like, I'm working from home. I'm going to skip that aspect of my day for a little bit and take this more casual. And, trust me, there was times I was working home where I would leave the house for the first time in a day and look down and realize I was wearing 2 different sneakers. And that's the reality of working from home. It's not the proudest thing in the world, but human nature is such that, wait a minute, if I don't have to be dressed to the nines all day here, then I'm certainly not going to. So a lot of those articles just kind of make me laugh a little bit, because listen, in theory, those things sound great, but I would guarantee that 99% of our industry will be sweatpants and flip-flops for the foreseeable future. And there's absolutely no reason that that's problematic.
I've got a video call later today where I've got to be, so I've got the button up on, but I'm wearing the sweatpants, man. I mean, you got to be comfortable.
You got to go sportscaster mode, right? You know how many times?
There you go.
How many times I've taught a grad school class with a shirt and a jacket on, and then either sweatpants or shorts or whatever it may be. As long as you can look the part from the neck up for Zoom, you're good to go. For the younger people in the industry, going back to something you just said, you and I talked before we got on. Obviously, we could address, as long as we want, the insanity of where we find ourselves right now, and that there's no roadmap for this. And it's obviously horrible on every possible level. From an industry perspective, sometimes you don't want change to come like this, but if it comes, it may never go back to the way it was. We may find out that things work like this. I actually have friends that work for a firm. They started the first 100% virtual firm. They just simply do not have an office, but they have, 15, 20 people spread around the country that work virtually. That's it. And you wonder if, they're going to kind of be trailblazers. And when people realize how well this works, if other firms might move to that model. But as I said, you and I being on that task force for the AICPA, trying to appeal to young accountants, I mean, this is something that a lot of good people that I have come across in my career has caused them to leave the industry. The feeling like they weren't being measured on productivity and the value they provided. They couldn't get where they wanted to be or be viewed the way they wanted to be viewed by their employers if they weren't willing to just be at that desk from 7 in the morning until 10 at night during tax season. And it frustrated them. And so for a lot of people, you're kind of given an opportunity now to put your money where your mouth is, to show that you can be given a great degree of flexibility and freedom. And if you still deliver, if you're still responsive, this could go very well in terms of changing the industry in the future. But it can go very bad, as we said. And I can't stress enough, everyone has to feel connected. And so you have to remember, and this was something that took me a while, Damien, right? I used to kind of try to hide when I was out on my mountain bike or going for a ski. I certainly wouldn't want anyone at my firm to know because I thought, well, the perception is going to be that I'm out here on vacation while they're all back there at work. But over time, I came to say to myself, you know what? I'm not going to hide it anymore. Like everyone knows why I moved out here. So if I'm skiing or if I'm going for a workout at lunch and my phone rings, I'm going to answer it because the pro of saying, hey, I'm getting a run in right now. I'll be back in the office in 10 minutes. I'll call you back. That is far greater than the con of if I say I'm skiing, I don't want anybody to know I'm skiing. So I'm just not going to answer the phone right now because when you're disconnected like that, it's the most helpless feeling if you're trying to figure out, am I going to be able to review a project today? Am I going to get something from somebody? And you call them and they're not answering. And so the advantage we all have now is every one of us should appreciate the situation we're in and should not spend a moment feeling guilty if the phone rings and you're playing with your kids and think, I can't answer the phone right now because I'm here with my kids. No, all bets are off. Everybody knows what we're being thrust into. Everybody knows the situation environment we find ourselves in. And so the biggest mistake you can make is, like I said, if you're not sitting at your desk with a quiet environment around you, think I'm not going to answer my phone or, I'm not going to respond to an email right away because I'm with my kids and, I just want to have this time. Responsiveness has to be critical, right? And there's nothing to hide from because unlike my situation 15 years ago, where I was the only one that was on the slopes while my firm in New Jersey was back at work, here everybody is in the same boat. And so it's funny, we were getting on this podcast and obviously my kids are home. Before I got on, my wife said to the kids, like, all right, we got to make sure we don't yell or get too loud. And I'm like, the funny thing is you should, because that's the reality that we're all dealing with right now. And the sooner we realize that we don't have to be embarrassed if our kid makes noise in the background, or as you and I have experienced on several podcasts, my dog decides to bark. The sooner we get past all that stuff and recognize we're all in this together and just communicate through all of it, the better off we're all going to be. And so, yeah, the biggest mistake you can make is say, I'm not in a perfect work environment right now, so I'm going to let this phone call go to voicemail or that phone call go to voicemail, when really the person on the other end just needs to hear your voice and know that like things are moving forward and here's when you're going to get it. And the biggest problem you could have right now is for people at a firm, whether it was a 5-person firm or a 1,000-person firm, to suddenly feel isolated from everyone else at the firm.
And as I've come along and grown, and I guess it just maybe it's maturing or getting more comfortable. I don't know. I found that the moments that I do that and just embrace who I am and what's happening at the kids in the background, and it is really funny because my wife and kids had the exact same conversation before we jumped on. I'm like, yeah, actually, this one, that's no big deal. Like it's to be expected. You're in there in the background, But whenever I embrace it, I feel like it always just ends up for the better. Like good things come from it, like you said, people feel better, feel more connected. They know that I care about working with them and helping them versus the opposite side. Yeah, only good things come. So that's fantastic advice.
Well, hours can be, and right on cue, my dog just pushed the door open and walked in here. But hours can be lost if someone just doesn't know just something simple. When can I expect to see that return, or when can we sit down and talk about this? If they call you and you don't respond, then they end up in a holding pattern, and unwillingness to answer a phone call because, again, you're worried that your kid's going to make it sound like you're not working hard, can set a number of different people's days in the wrong direction. And so as an industry, we all need to kind of move past that.
Yeah.
We said this already. Like, if you don't know it already, you will. Your day's going to feel longer. You're going to have more time. And as an industry, you and I have talked about things people can do for growth and things that people tend to always say, oh, well, I don't have, and listen to this right on cue. Here comes the dog bark. Sorry. So again, this is perfect. This is fitting for the subject matter we're talking about. But what I was going to say is you have more time now. You have flexibility. So you and I have talked in the past about, okay, like what's the best way to learn when no one's teaching you? And we've always said, hey, read court cases. And people said, well, okay, like when do you find the time to do that? And I said, well, I work remotely at 3:30 every day. I can kind of stop what I'm doing, print out the U.S. tax court cases for the day and read them. And other people say, well, I don't have that luxury. Like in an office environment, it could be Janice's birthday at 3:30. It could be another staff meeting at 3:30. It could be this, it could be that. Well, all of us now, we kind of control our own schedules. And again, as long as you're communicating, as long as your work is getting done, it's a time where you can do some things that otherwise you may not have felt you had the flexibility to do. And so, you could read more court cases. You could dive into a section of the law that interests you because your day is now under your control. And as long as you're doing what I said, as long as you're communicating and as long as you're delivering, right? Nobody's going to know if you're sitting there reading court cases from 3:30 to 3:50 in the afternoon.
I love it. That's like you said, living the advice, and maybe even trying to find the positives in even this current situation where maybe you're looking at this as not being ideal. Didn't really want to do the remote thing yet, but there are some ways you can really, I guess, look at it and try to create something different from it. And maybe to that end, I mean, and I feel like there's no way we can have a conversation here and not, you have already interjected Internal Revenue Code section, so we can check that box again. Going back to this checklist thing, right? But you talk about some of the challenges, and we spent so much time last year talking about changes in the TCJA and just all the. I mean, and that's not even it, right? I mean, there's how many other changes that we're dealing with this year too. But I guess I'd be interested in your perspective, your take on just how the season's been going for you and challenges or things you've been taken away from it so far.
Well, you can divide it into two seasons, right? And I would say that dividing line was right about beginning of last week, maybe Monday, Tuesday, where all of a sudden, it was business as usual. Everything was getting done. I mean, my tax season was actually going, very smooth as far as business returns. From a technical perspective, the reality is most of the returns that are going to cause a problem from TCJA in terms of, year one carryovers and things like that, those returns were going to be extended anyway. I think some of the more complicated things I had been seeing was carry forward of 163J limitations. What you do in year two if somebody that was subject in year one is suddenly under the 26 million, things like that. Of course, your normal spate of 199 Cap A issues. But the stuff I was really anxious for hadn't crossed my desk yet, nor would it usually by March 15th. That stuff tends to get extended or come later in the year. So everything was kind of business as usual. Again, it appeared we weren't experiencing as a firm quite as many software issues, but it's always tough to tell because, as I said, the more complicated returns really haven't come through the process yet. But then everything just went crazy,
Right.
right, at the beginning of last week, because this thing went from 0 to 60 really fast. And, the worst thing that probably happened is everybody realizing that this isn't going to be a normal tax season. There's going to be not only some type of relief in terms of due date, but also who knows? There could be obviously abatement of interest and penalties, but there could also be tax law changes coming in terms of payroll tax cuts or whatever it may be. And so let's be honest, as an industry for the last 6 days, I think we've probably spent more time looking into the future than we have dealing with the present. And that's totally understandable. I mean, like I said, this is uncharted territory. But I think today is obviously meaningful. You and I are recording on the deadline. So, we know that ship has sailed. So now all the emphasis is going to be on 415. I would expect, I think as you would, that we're going to get, probably a 90-day extension of the 415 deadline. I mean, again, I probably shouldn't say that. I mean, that's what's being requested, but we'll see what comes of it. But I think obviously we're going to see very liberal abatements of interest and penalties for reasonable cause. But hopefully after today, within the next 48 hours, we'll hear exactly what the rules are so that all the speculation can stop. Because, that's certainly what I've experienced, on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen it too. Everybody's just speculating about what's going to come instead of maybe, just focusing on what we got to get done right now. And that's totally natural. But I think as soon as we get some real guidance, we can all kind of move forward. But, this in so many ways, like you said, is uncharted territory. And it's not just from a personal perspective, but from a professional perspective. And tax season may go well into the summer. And just like individuals, right? Some are going to sink and some are going to swim, being able to work from home. Some firms, some are going to sink and some are going to swim if tax season gets extended 90 days. I mean, you know how that goes. Some places, it doesn't matter how long you extend tax season, it's always going to be a fire drill at the end. It's the firms that can efficiently kind of schedule out and budget their work efficiently that are going to thrive during this time.
And there's also probably something to be learned from. And I was actually talking to a few of my colleagues that have gone through this, like down in Houston, where they've had it due to other disasters, flooding, hurricanes, and the like, that their advice was basically, don't just stop and don't delay, and particularly also working with people that you're working with, the clients, and making sure they're continuing to move forward, because otherwise, it just ends up in this kind of constant busy season type of a feel if you're not careful. So that's good advice to kind of stay focused on what we can get done now. We could talk all day and speculate all day about what could have, would have, should have happened. But at the end of the day, we've got to focus on what we've got.
I help coach the local high school mountain bike team. And I was talking to some of the kids yesterday and they're like, this is crazy. Like there's no school, there's no anything anymore. And I was like, no, I get it. It's all crazy. But if we kind of compartmentalize from a mountain biking perspective, you pretty much have no excuse a couple of weeks from now to not be in the best shape of your life, because you've got all the time in the world, right, to go ride and get into shape. Well, again, from a tax perspective, there's really no excuse to not be as productive as we've ever been before. I mean, because everyone's scared and we have kids and we have to keep them calm, but there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. And so your day is going to get a lot longer just by virtue of being home. But then just the fact that you're not running off to a kid's basketball game. I mean, there's a lot of time to knock out these returns so that you're not kicking the can down the road and then just as busy in May and June when hopefully we can return to some sense of normalcy. And so same kind of concept as the mountain biker. It's like, this is not ideal, but from a tax perspective, in the middle of tax season, it's never going to be easier to knock out a bunch of work than it is over the next few weeks.
It's a good point. As you say, I don't necessarily call them distractions, but I mean, right, there's, because there certainly are distractions with all the disruption, but kind of your typical day-to-day stuff that everyone, can sometimes kind of chew up your days. Like
it's
said,
just
right?
gone.
It's just gone. And now that's just gone. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. I guess kind of bringing it all together here, thoughts that you leave anybody with as we kind of embark into this unknown period here.
Like I said, this is extremely unfortunate. It is also an opportunity to change the industry going forward, but it's only if everybody's on board. And when I say everybody, look, it's human nature, right? To look at like the younger generation and say, you're the ones we're worried about. Are you going to be available? Are you going to take too much advantage of this? Are you not going to work enough? But you know what? The younger generation, I'm sure, will be just fine. It doesn't mean that the older generations, guys like me and you, we're not off the hook. Like, not only do we have to be doing our own work, we cannot stop educating the next generation. There's no reason it has to. The conversation you and I had about Zoom and continuing to go through returns, to me, that's what scares me the most. What scares me the most is not that all the staff people are suddenly going to stop working every day because we've given them a little flexibility and somehow they don't have the self-discipline to knock out their workload. I know they do. Of course they do. My bigger concern is that at the upper reaches, we're going to say, well, I can't just walk down the hall and explain to this person this, that, or the other thing. And so I'm just going to clean up the changes, get it done myself, and move this thing out the door. We can't lose touch with the fact that we're still part of an industry. We're still part of a firm. And you reach a point in your career where really your ultimate responsibility is building up the next generation. And that could absolutely suffer going to this type of model we're going to in the near future, but there's zero reason it has to. And so I would just implore everyone, right, instead of pointing the finger at the younger generation and wondering if they're going to be available, making sure you look in the mirror and say, hey, am I available to make sure that I'm still helping them get where they need to be? Because as you said before, it really is true. The people really with the most at stake to lose here is the younger generation if they're not getting the type of hands-on learning experience they would have gotten in an office environment. But with the technology we have today, and I can say this with 100% certainty because I've been doing it, there's just no reason that has to be the case.
I'm not just saying it's fantastic advice. I feel like I always say that to almost everything you say because it is fantastic advice. And I was even just sitting there thinking about how many people across this country right now, I think that would love to be on the other side of a Zoom conversation on a 338H10 election conversation with you. How awesome is that experience, right? I mean, but that is so true, so true.
What did I say, buddy? I'm like 7-Eleven, right? May not always be doing business, but I'm always open. Somebody wants to Zoom 338H10. You just say, you know where to find me. I'll teach you whatever you want to know.
There you go. Well, hey, I appreciate you jumping on, especially at the tax deadline in the middle of a pandemic, everything else going on. Really great advice that you offered, and I'm really excited to share it with people because I feel like it's just what people need at this point in time when there is, the stakes are high. We got to get this right, and we got to make it through. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me, Damien. I always love coming on and talking to you. And until next time.
So how's working from home going for you? Let us know by sharing your experience with me on social media, or you can find me out on Twitter where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. You can also drop us an email at simplytax@bkd.com to let us know what you think, and we always appreciate your feedback with a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.